I want to thank the folks with Emma and everyone else with the Scotia Giller, Scotia Bank Giller Prize for setting up this evening for tonight, letting us talk about genre fiction. Collectively, those of us here this evening, I mean, have sold, I would have guessed, certainly several millions of copies of books, and love what we do. And I think really quickly, I want to just run through with everyone to just quickly tell us what's your latest or one that's imminently coming. So Daniel.
Thanks, Linwood. It's great to be here. Yeah, my latest novel just came out a few weeks ago. It's called Fit to Die, and it's a thriller all about the toxic diet industry, set in Vancouver and LA, and it's on the shelves now.
Great. Sheena.
Well, I haven't published in a minute, Linwood, but my last two books came out within a month of each other. One is a YA called Fight Like a Girl, and it's set around the sport of Muay Thai, which is a sport that I've trained for almost 15 years. Well, I think over 15 years now. And it's about someone from my own heritage, a Trinidadian Canadian girl who starts to suspect that her mother might be a murderer. And the second one that came out within a month of that is No Going Back, which is the third installment of my Nora Watts series.
Great. Shari, you got one we're on the eve of publication, right?
Coming out in July. My new one's going to be called Everyone Here Is Lying. So it's out in July. And it's, a suspense thriller.
Awesome. Marissa.
So I have my general adult fiction novel is a little bit out, not until October 2024. It's called The Lightning Bottles. It's about a missing 90s rock star who's leaving Banksy-esque street art messages for his wife to come find him. But that's a little while out. So I'm leaning really into the genre of romances lately. And I have written a multi-faith holiday romance with Uzma Jalaluddin, who's a best-selling Canadian author. It's called 3 Holidays and a Wedding. And it's like if love actually happened with Hanukkah, Ramadan, Christmas in a snowy Ontario town. And it's just so charming and delightful. I actually can't wait for winter. So.
And Rick, we know that you've been on the Canadian bestseller list for weeks now and continue to be. Tell us about that.
Well, thank you. And hello to everyone. My current book is Everything She Feared. It's about a single young mother who fears that her daughter may be a murderer.
We've all been there. Who hasn't had that problem? So listen, it's lovely that we get a little bit of a recognition. I think that sometimes we feel sort of like the Rodney Dangerfield of Canadian fiction. No, we're not getting our respect. And I mean, I've lost count of how many awards there are in Canada for literary fiction, poetry, and so forth. And to the best of my knowledge, it's only the Crime Writers of Canada that offer, that have awards that honor crime fiction. And then, of course, and probably others who are like, if you're writing romance or horror, can bring me up to speed on what organizations may honor that kind of work. But I think I want to throw this out to Sheena right at the beginning. Because when we were talking at the Motive Festival on the weekend, I had this recollection that we were talking, and first of all, when you started writing your fiction, it hadn't even occurred to you that it was sort of genre. And on top of that, I think you had made some sort of comment to the effect that people said, when are you going to write sort of serious books? If I got that right. So I want to throw it out to you. And I would also just point out right now, just in case I suddenly start doing this because the smoke particles have been getting under my contact lenses and driving me crazy all day. But so if you see that happen, I'm not having a seizure or anything. So Sheena.
Well, it's been crazy with the air quality just all over. So I kind of feel your pain. So yeah, I didn't know that people did not consider us to be serious writers. I just, I have always been a passionate reader, and I never thought that I was going to be a novelist. I actually had wanted to be an actor and a screenwriter. And then pretty much like as soon as I got into that industry, everyone was like, oh man, like you're such a good assistant. And I could never progress, right? And so I decided one day, I was like, I'm going to prove that I'm a good writer and I'm going to go and write a novel. And like, I had no idea how to do that. Like, but I was like filled with confidence that I could. So I quit my job, I moved to Vancouver, and I started writing this novel, which became The Lost Ones, which was my debut. And I didn't know that people didn't think that it was serious literature. For me, I'm just a passionate reader, and I read pretty much everything. Like my last book that I just finished last night, which is so good, was this huge tome, Brandon Sanderson's Words of Radiance, from his Stormlight Archive series. And I read romance, I read thrillers, I read everything. And so, and I read literary fiction as well. I just was not aware that in Canada specifically, that there wasn't, we were not really given a space in the literary scene and not taken that seriously. So it was a shock. And then I met crime writers and I was like, these guys are great. Like, why would I want to be among any other kind, environment? Because crime writers are super chill. They take everything in stride and they're fun to be around. So to me, the payoff for not being taken seriously in the Canadian literary landscape, potentially, I'm not sure that if everyone feels that way, but for me personally, the payoff is really that I just get to surround myself with like the best people, the nicest people. And when we go to festivals like Motive and BoucherCon and Thriller Fest and stuff, we meet really genuinely nice, cool people and make good connections.
Yeah, true.
We have readership as well. So that's something that is a good payoff too.
I think there was something happened along the line that in Canada we've made this false distinction between genre fiction and literary fiction, as if they're opposites. So I don't know why that happened, but there's lots of genre fiction that is very literary in quality, and there's lots of literary fiction that isn't that good. To me, no, I gotta be honest here. I think it's a false dichotomy to say it's either genre or it's literary. That's BS. I think it's, when novels started, back when there was Dickens and the Brontes, they had lots of secrets and murders and stuff in their books. Like, they weren't afraid to entertain, and we consider them very literary now. But somewhere along the way, we got this idea that genre fiction was about story, and genre sort of signals to you what kind of story, whether it's crime fiction or a medical thriller or a romance. And literary is everything else that doesn't have a story. But I don't think of literature as something that shouldn't have a story, but that seems to be the way that we've gone in Canada. We've gone towards literary fiction being everything that doesn't have an easily classifiable kind of story.
Well,
and a lot of it's just unreadable.
That's why when I did I did an event in Kitchener on Saturday with Anthony Horowitz, and I just happened to mention that literary fiction or literary is for writers who just can't plot. But but everybody, others jump in, please. This is the sort of thing everybody can jump in wherever they want. I mean, I was going to go. I think Daniel and Rick, and this may be true of you, Marissa, but Daniel and Rick, your fiction has kind of drawn from your work experience. Is that true?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. For me, I mean, I come from the tradition of being a journalist, but I always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a kid. And for me, it's just storytelling. A good story is a good story. And I think, just a mini, Shari was touching on it, it's just a mini evolution of literature and genre. As books became more popular and more people throughout history began to read, of course, we all know the distinctions is really for marketing. If you prefer Westerns, if you prefer fantasy, but I think the qualities that make what we would categorize as great literature cross all genres, really. It's all storytelling. I only picked up Zola's Therese Raquin,
Oh, I love
if I'm
that
pronouncing
book.
it correctly, because King mentioned it in Billy Summers. My wife mentioned it, and before I even picked up Billy Summers, I had to read that little piece of literature, and that is a gripper. That could be a Dateline story today, and that's just a beautiful masterpiece. And of course, we've all heard this before, that Crime and Punishment could be, a psychological thriller, of course. Robinson Crusoe can be considered an adventure tale today. And if you look at Elements of War and Peace, those are great military thrillers if you wanted to bring those through. So for me, I totally agree. It's a false distinction now. It may have been necessary maybe for marketing and when the dime paperback novels came out and that sort of thing. But if you were to read True Grit, forget the movie. If you were to read the book, that is a charming, charming book by Charles Portis, and I recommend that. I'll bring that up again later. That just is magical, that book.
I would also like to add that as a female author, when I first started out, I was writing fiction, and then I got a publisher, and it became women's fiction or domestic fiction, and then all of those categorizations happened. So now the reason I started writing romances is because I thought, okay, at least I feel comfortable with this categorization. And now I will say about my other novels that they're not genre. And I've started to just say, this is fiction. Because I found myself really shocked and rattled when I debuted. And because I wrote a book that was about women and domestic life, it became a subgenre that I didn't know existed. And that I don't think should exist, frankly, because Tom Perrotta, for example, is elevated, and many female authors I know are called domestic, and I don't like that at all. So
Marissa, what's your background before you started writing fiction full time?
I was a journalist. So I went to what is now METU for journalism, and I worked at several newspapers, and then freelanced, and I was a book reviewer. So I I guess there's a whole other conversation about MFAs and literary background. I have a journalistic background. I've always been a writer.
Linwood, sorry, my earphones, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, so like Rick, my background is medicine, and I'm an emergency physician, and really I'm humbled to be with this collection. I still have to work in the emergency department, but aspire to be up there with you guys. And it's, but I often get labeled medical thriller writer, which is such a silly distinction often because, even as, I'm sure we'll talk about the subgenres in crime fiction are silly, but to your point, I don't know why it happens in literature. When you look at TV now, a show like Breaking Bad is considered the most artful, sophisticated, often rated the best show ever. And that is a total crime and psychological thriller. I don't know why they put the same artificial distinctions on what we do.
That's it.
Yeah, I agree.
And if we get past that, I presume that everybody's happy doing what they do, because why, just to throw this out there, why did you pick to, writing the kind of book that you do? Just very quickly for me, it wasn't a conscious choice. It was just sort of, this would always be the kind of thing that I would just gravitate to write. And based on the kind of things that I had written and or had read, that it was just kind of natural. Was that true for everyone else?
Having been through writing books that were difficult to define, I will say going into the genre of rom-coms now, it is an absolute delight to sell books and to have readership and to know who that readership is and to be able to easily find them. It's really rewarding.
Well, I think that the whole point about genre is people know they're going to get a good story. And the problem with literary is that people don't know what they're going to get. They often don't get a story at all. And I think that's why genre fiction sells so well. Literary fiction, they've almost got an image now that, literary fiction is good for you and it's edifying, and genre fiction is bad for you and not edifying. It's pure entertainment. It's for enjoyment. It's not good for you. It's for enjoyment. And people want to read to enjoy it. And I think 100 years ago, people read for enjoyment, and they read great literature for enjoyment. And I find that a lot of great literature these days is pretty dull. Come on, support me here, people. Don't leave me out dry.
I'm totally
out here.
I'm totally with you, Shari. Don't you find that you write the stories you would want to read yourself? I always imagine somebody reading a story on a plane or by the pool, or and what would they want to read?
Yeah, like you're thinking of your reader. right? You want to think of your reader, and I don't know, perhaps literary writers think of their reader too, but that reader is a very genre fiction is more accessible, and it's more entertaining, and it has a story. And I think for me, literary fiction often doesn't have a story. The best literary fiction has a good story.
And I
But,
think that, yeah, and three of us, I think half of us here tonight have a background in journalism, and a lot of, and there's so many crime writers who have come out of, I mean, Michael Connelly is the first that comes to mind. And I think that what sort of distinguishes us, and this is true of others too, is that we're not so busy writing trying to impress you with our wonderfully descriptive passages and so forth, because what's been hammered into us for so long is to write clearly, to write as concisely as possible, to not fill it with bafflegab and all sorts of stuff, and to keep, and so that's been ingrained into us. So when it comes to writing fiction, what we want to write is stuff that is very accessible, as you say, Shari, that is and is entertaining, and is not, and I don't think that if something is, I'm thinking of the Spencer novels by Robert B. Parker, which look, it's not easy to write that simply, I think.
It's very hard. Nathaniel Hawthorne said, my favorite quote is, easy reading is damn hard writing. And it is. And that is a huge, I really don't love when I slip and maybe look on Goodreads or something. And, it's a quick, easy read, and just bring it to the beach. And there's sometimes this disdain. And I just want to say that's the trick. Like, that's our talent, is this simple writing. It certainly doesn't come easily to me. But you're right, Linwood, at the heart of any journalist is this desire to tell a story. But think about journalism and how journalists get to the heart of who people really are, with their digging and their good journalism. It's great.
You make a good point about people thinking it's easy to write a genre novel. People think it's easy to write a thriller. Well, I wrote two literary novels before I wrote thrillers. And I have to say, and my first one was, edited by Lynn Cody and mentored by David Adams Richards. And I've done 7 thrillers. The thrillers have all been harder to write than those 2 non-thriller books. They're harder to write.
More than once,
but they sell way better.
More than once, I have heard about writers who decide that they want to write a thriller because they think that's the way to make a whole lot of money. And which, of course, I thank you all for not laughing. But it's, I think you have to go in, if you go into it with that attitude, you're doomed. I think that people who write crime and thriller stuff do it because that's what they love to do, and they have an inclination to do it. If you do it because you think it's a way to make some quick cash, you're gonna just crash and burn.
Linwood, I'm like, I totally agree. And I'm sitting here with 5 exemplary, brilliant storytellers who can, plot brilliantly. You need a good plot, obviously, to tell a thriller. But I hate that cliche, that stereotype that thrillers are plot driven, because, like literary fiction, like any fiction, it's still a character driven story. If you can't invest our readers in the characters, they don't care about how brilliant your plot is.
For me, it's about voice. So I don't think in terms of genre. I think in terms of, okay, so this specific voice in my head is telling me a story or inviting me on a journey, and I follow that. And because I think I have a dark mind, it's often going to be in the crime world. But I feel like I could put my narrative voice up against any literary narrative voice and still be comfortable with where I sit and still be like really proud of my work. So I don't feel any such ways about my work. I still think they're really good books, and it's because of this voice. And yes, the plots move, I hope, because as a reader, that's what I want. And also as a writer, that's what I want. I want things to be happening to somebody, and for us to take away from that. I think the best book that I've ever read is Smilla Sense of Snow. I don't know if you guys have ever read that. It came out maybe about 20 years ago, 25, 30 years. But it's set in Denmark and also Greenland. And it was so beautifully written. and it contained so much insight into the human psyche, but it was also a thriller, and it
Mm.
had a bit of everything, and I think that that's what good work does.
Mhm.
I
For
think
me,
I think Sheena's touched on something in Daniel too, because if all we did was plot, the books wouldn't be successful. I think what we end up doing is we have the structure, we have the kind of through line, but then we have to do what great literary writers do, which is to then attach to all that plot great characters and color and voice, as Sheena says, because that's what makes it's going back to Breaking Bad, you know, like it's going back to that kind of thing. But Marissa, Rick, what are your thoughts?
well, I'm all over the place with my thoughts, but I mean, you know, sometimes the definition of genre is that it's formulaic. I mean, I know you just touched on just the craft and the structuring, but it's deemed formulaic in a derogatory sense. But with literary fiction, you know, all bets are off on that note. But for me, I came from a family of storytellers. Ever since I was a little kid, I had older aunts and uncles, of course, and I was always stealing their books. I was like adolescent, and I was reading Valley of the Dolls. I was reading The Love Machine. I was reading The Godfather, right through. And I thought these were great books. I mean, Puzo himself was first tried literary fiction. It didn't go anywhere, and then he wrote The Godfather, which I think is an epic crime fiction drama, family drama. But I think when you look at literary fiction, it supposedly is to elevate the craft, is to touch on many themes and emotions. And when you look at the definition of what literary fiction is, it doesn't stop with us, with what we do with crime fiction. We do the very same thing. And formula to me is just good storytelling and how you engage the reader, and you take the reader on a journey, and they want to stay in the book. They want to turn the pages. That's, I like, Dan touched on this. I like to write what I like to read. I like something that's going to keep me engaged and keep me going. And there's really no plot versus character versus this versus that. It all goes in the pot. It's all important, or else you have nothing.
I agree with you too. I think the way that I always look at my fiction is, okay, which secrets am I going to keep? And that is always the engine for me when I'm reading any novel. So I think of Elizabeth Hay. I remember the novel Late Nights on Air, and that's a very literary novel. And I don't remember what the secret was, but I just remember being so compelled to turn those pages. And I think that basically any author, if they keep the reader in enough suspense that it's the smallest secret at the end, I really admire that. I admire, like in Prayer for Owen Meany, where, you know, this big revelation at the beginning that he's the instrument of his mother's death, and then you're just reading to find out what happens. It's great storytelling, and I just, that's my formula is, okay, I've got to keep these secrets. And but for some reason, when a book becomes a page turner, you do get kind of relegated into this category. But I do struggle to not like it because again, it's so much easier to find a readership when you're considered a bit more commercial, and just ignore the insults or veiled insults that may happen.
I remember being at Thriller Fest 2 years ago, and there was a writer there who I shall not name, who with literary sort of pretensions, and was writing a thriller because he said, quote, he wanted to elevate the form. And I kept thinking, bite me.
Thinking by me, I would have said it.
Perhaps something else was really what came to mind. But let's, you know, instead of just sort of whining and complaining about the sort of distinctions and so forth, maybe sort of quickly, each of you just jump in wherever and just sort of, what's your process? Like, what kickstarts a book for you? Is it character? Is it, is the situation? Is it the plot itself? What's that little kernel that gets going for you? Marissa, why don't you start off?
So back when I first started writing, it was always characters who would come to me and I would meander towards wherever they were going. And it was very difficult. And eventually I'd get there. And I'd always think, again, to mention John Irving, like if I could only figure out the ending, and then I would know where I was going. But recently with my last two novels, Lucky came to me as a situation. So I happened to be listening to the radio in the US and heard some DJs talking about a huge lottery ticket payout in, I think it was North Carolina, biggest in state history, hadn't been claimed 24 hours, and they were speculating about why that might be. One of the DJs said, you know, sometimes people are wanted for a crime and they can't come forward. And I was like, oh, that's a great situation. And I had to sit with that idea for several months before Lucky came along, and it happened with my rock star book too. So definitely I love that. I love trying to fit characters into situations now. And then with the romances, because I've mostly co-authored them, it's usually the situation and an outline and the characters all at once. Like we just kind of sit down and figure it out. But I suppose there's always just like a little pitch, like a what if during the year that Hanukkah, Ramadan, and Christmas all fell at once, a bunch of travelers were diverted to tiny town, and you know, all of these little tropes that make romance writing so much fun.
Sherry?
You know, it's a different thing for me each time. Like, you know, sometimes it's a situation, like my recent one was just the idea of a father with a very difficult child who loses his patience, and he hits her really hard and he's horrified and the girl disappears. But I just had the idea of the dad losing it, and then the daughter manipulating him and saying, I'm going to tell mom, and then the girl disappears and you don't know what happened. So sometimes it's a situation, sometimes it's the idea of a crime. One of my books was inspired because by a real case in the States about this woman was she died because she was sitting in a car and there was a snowstorm and the snow blocked the tailpipe and she died. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting? That would be a really good way to kill your family. If you wanted to kill your wife and child, you would just put them in the car with the stuffed tailpipe and shovel them out, and they'd be dead in 20 minutes. So that's what started off that book. And I thought, well, that's cool. So now the question is, did he kill his first wife? And then I go on from there. So sometimes it's something I read. Sometimes it's just an image. It's different every time. I don't know where it comes from. My problem is I only seem to have about one idea a year. I wish I had more ideas.
Just has to be one a year. That's all we need. You know?
That's all we need. You just need, I have a lot of ideas. I have one good idea, one workable idea a year. And as you say, that's enough. Yeah.
You're doing 2 a year this year, though, aren't you, Linwood?
No, well, there were 2 books last year, but that was, the one that was, where is it? It's up there somewhere. I don't know. Look Both Ways was a bit of a different kind of a book for me. It was more like a Michael Crichton thriller with a sort of a tech sci-fi angle. And I wrote that book like 3 years ago, and it took 3 years for my publishers to figure out what to do with it. So I kind of posted on that. So they finally came out this past year, so I had the 2. But generally, the only time I've ever had kind of 2 books in a year was when I wrote a trilogy. And I wrote them all back. I wrote all 3 of them in 15 months. And so we did bring them out sort of 8 months apart. Well, I'll never do that again. But anyway, it's just about, I kept figuring that I would get to the 3rd book. I think it was something I should have set up in the first because it was a trilogy. So I put them together as quickly as I could. And in fact, just as I was doing page proofs on the first one, I was writing the 3rd, and I went into the first one and made changes. So, but it was, I don't want to do that again. But Daniel, where, you know, there's a lot of stuff from what you've observed in your work.
Yeah, sometimes it's like Sherry. I mean, I never know what's going to inspire me. I mean, lately I've been trying to build novels around themes, you know, medical, scientific themes. I learned the hard way not to write a novel about vaccine hesitancy in the middle of a pandemic where the most controversial vaccine comes out. You get a lot of letters and emails and not as many book sales. But my latest book was actually tragically a real story that happened in Vancouver. I wasn't involved in the case, but a young woman who came in who had ordered these online diet pills that none of us had ever heard of. And she had this intractable fever and she died, within 12 hours. There was nothing anybody could do. And it's this horrific poison that's being distributed online. And I don't write nonfiction. So I said, I have to build a thriller about this toxic diet industry and this poison that's being available. That's how Fit to Die came to be.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else want to jump in on this?
Well, for me, it's usually voice, and then like almost immediately after, I wrap it around a premise. So in screenwriting, there's something called a log line, which is basically an elevator pitch, and what it gives is a character and a conflict. And so my mind works in tangents. So like if I get the voice, then the conflict immediately sort of comes, and the premise immediately comes. So for Fight Like a Girl, it was really like I was in Rome. I was supposed to be working on my third Nora book, and then there was a heat wave, and it was just I kind of went a little bit fever mad, and this voice kind of came through, and it was the single line that said, "Rule number one of being a woman from Trinidad: be hella fierce." And then just immediately I sunk into that voice and that concept, and it within 5 days, about a week, I had like the bones of a novel. And so for me, it's really those two things. And I try not to pick apart this too much, like this intuition that I have. I think sometimes I view it in a sort of mystical way of like this voice and premise. And so I try not to like analyze that too much, because I think that that's really what my process is just immediately just get a sense of a person and where they are and their journey and their conflict, and just kind of go without really plotting too much, so that I can get that energy. Because I don't know how to write a book, guys. Like I probably shouldn't be saying I don't know how to write a book. And so it's just like, it's like a magical thing in my mind, this trust that I have that I can write a book.
Marissa, Rick?
Well, for me, it's like Shari said, it's a combination. It varies with each book, character, situation. True story. I think one of my earliest books, second book, I was a reporter with the Calgary Herald, and a child went missing in the Rocky Mountains. The couple had gone out camping, and the little girl had wandered off. And it was a massive search. It became a national story. And the Mounties told me they were also investigating the background of the family, because they said she had wandered off. And it was an extremely remote area, extremely remote and rugged and dangerous. So that was an inspiration for me to do a what if. And while I was researching it, I worked with the national rangers in Glacier National Park. I contacted them, and they helped me. They sent me their manual. And I'm mixing things up here. Mounties had told me earlier when I said, what was the perfect murder? And they said a wilderness accident. There are no witnesses. Anything could happen. And in the manual from the rangers in Glacier National Park, I turn the page, and whenever there's a wilderness accident, 3 hikers go out and 2 come back, sort of thing, always assume criminal intent. And those words just jumped from the page to me, and I went, that's what a fiction writer needs to read. Always assume criminal intent.
Really? That's so interesting.
It's kind of like when everybody falls off a cruise ship. You know what I mean? Like, who's there to know? That's also the other place that's a perfect murder, I think. Marissa?
I think I went first. I talked about, I went first, but I will say the mystical thing that Sheena was talking about.
I had smoke in my eyes for a second.
That's okay. But I will say, I feel lucky sat down beside me on a bus one day. I happened to be on a bus, and I can almost picture her sitting down beside me and starting to say, I'm your character, and I'm a con artist. And it felt magical. So sometimes I think there is magic involved.
Can I ask you guys, because people have mentioned outline and plotting, and I'm always fascinated. I'll never get this opportunity with the 5 of you again in this kind of setting to ask you, how often do you surprise yourself? You start with the outline, and then, the villain comes out of nowhere, the twist comes out of nowhere. Because to me, that is one of the great joys of our job, when we surprise ourselves as we're writing the stories.
Anyone?
Well, it happens all the time. I do outline because that's what the publisher would like to see. And throughout my career, they've always purchased the outline But I always tell people at conferences, just imagine yourself, you're going to drive from Toronto to Vancouver. That's your outline. There's a difference between the plan and the reality along the way.
Yeah.
So as I get going, things will happen and pop up that will be, oh, this is much better than what I had thought. Or
Yeah.
the characters, they do come to life, as much of the cliche as that is. But for me, outline and then, yes, surprised all the time.
I had to come up with some outlines for the Nora series, and what I discovered is that nobody reads them, or like if they read them, they forget them. And so for me, the books actually end up being just a complete surprise anyway. And the way that I approach outlines, if I'm like forced to do one, is like just by scenes, like in this, like a screenplay, in the scene, like how do you get from point A to point B? There, you just say like, okay, well, she's gonna write Toronto to Vancouver. Okay, well, that's just a little line, but then how you get there and the conflicts involved in those little things, those are endless surprises. And I love surprises because sometimes like just on the page as I'm doing the writing, it just sort of pops up and I'm like, yes, and it's an instinct thing.
And your characters do become very real to you, right? So you don't know them at the beginning of the journey. So you don't necessarily know what they might say, but you may have put them in a situation mid-book and then you're just like, they would never do that, or they would never say that. My one thriller that I did write, The Last Resort, those characters. So I don't know if this must happen to you guys all the time, because I felt like I was in a very dark place and I would wake up and I scribbled things down like Shell is secretly drinking, and they were taking on a life of their own in my dreams and just wanting things to get worse and darker and more sinister. And it was awesome. And I didn't ever do it again because it scared me.
I was gonna ask one other thing before. Soon we're gonna go to. First of all, remind anyone who is watching that there'll be an opportunity shortly. You can post some questions, and we're gonna try to get to some of those soon. And I also we're asking for each of us to recommend a book before we go to that, which we'll do shortly. But the last thing I sort of want to touch on. You know, I forget when it was. I was at an event a few years ago, and there was someone who had done a sort of literary novel, and there was me and somebody else. And one of the questions was, well, how long did it take to write the book? And the woman who done this other novel said it took 6 years. And I thought, how could anything take 6 years to do? They built the new World Trade Center in less time, I was pretty sure. And we're all on what I would call sort of that literary treadmill. When you write crime fiction, you write horror, romance, whatever, you know, whatever we're calling genre, there is this kind of expectation from the public and publishers that you produce annually. And how does everybody deal with that? Is that a problem? Does it get to you, or is it not a big deal? You know, how does that rate of production, how do you deal with that? Anybody jump in.
I find it's a pretty tough pace. You know, I think when you add in the travel and the promotion and everything, it's a busy year. But it's doable. You know, I think I couldn't do more than one a year. But I wish I could do one every year and a half or something. I don't know. I find one a year with if that's all you did, it would be fine. But there's so much social media and reading to blurb and travel and festivals and, you know, events. There's just so much all the time that it's a book a year is enough for me, for sure.
When I was a younger person, I was still working full time and producing books. And I think I had more stamina then, and maybe I made use of my time and more effectively. You know, working on the commute, working on weekends, and I can't go on without saying it's my family that was supportive, very supportive, because you know, you had to dedicate a lot of weekend time, a lot of family time to getting the job done and meeting contractual obligations. And I thought when I was retired and could write full time, I would be producing 10,000 books a year. That's not true because I'm older now. The stamina seems to have gone as well, but I think I'm wiser in many ways as well. But yeah, I don't mind. It's a job, and I'm happy to have it. And I count myself extremely fortunate to be able to do this and stepping aside on things. When we hear from readers, and I'm sure we've all heard from readers, it's a wonderful feeling to know that you've connected with the reader and you've done your job, and they got what you were trying to do, and that's worth everything.
I think book a year is daunting. That just started for me with the rom-coms, and luckily I've had a co-author, but I will be eventually doing that on my own. And honestly, I am writing 2 books right now, and my husband has taken a work break to support me because we have 2 kids, and it's not easy. Like I love it. I love being a writer. I actually do wake up every day and say, I'm so happy I get to do this. This is a job, but it's the job I always wanted, and it's a great job, but it's tough. It is tough. It's a little bit draining, and I have to, my work-life balance gets out of whack, and I have to rein it in and say, you know what, you actually can't write all the time. You can't hide in your office all the time. You have to come out and be a part of family life, because I could just sit here all the time.
Yeah, I mean, for me, as Rick said, it's still such a thrill that anybody wants to read my book, and even 14 books later, I still feel like an imposter sometimes around my peers like you guys. But in emergency medicine, it's sort of the one thing you have to be a good emergency doctor is you have to be able to multitask, and you have to be able to keep up. So I do my training has made me kind of thrive off that pressure. And frankly, I think I write better with my sort of self-imposed deadlines. I think that the tension, and the pressure comes through in the thriller writing. So
Well, you've got the added pressure of, you haven't given up the day job.
No.
So that to me makes it a lot tougher to try to put.
But they're very complementary, like for me, the writing is often a stress release. So I love it. I really do consider it a blessing. I certainly do it for free. I'm addicted.
Sheena?
I don't know how you do it, Daniel. Honestly, it seems like so much. I know an ER doctor, and he's one of my consultants for my books, and just what you guys do, and then also in your spare time have to write. That's crazy. Well, honestly, I had like a mental breakdown there when I had to do like a book a year kind of thing. It did weigh on me just because I come from a background of being a disciplined person, but just accessing my creativity, you can't draw from nothing. And what I found is that I write every day anyway, and I love to write, but what was difficult for me to really understand, and even still to navigate, is the publishing industry. I didn't know anything really about it. I had just challenged myself. I'm going to write a book. And then I found myself writing a series and then doing a YA on the side just because the inspiration struck. And I didn't understand the pressures of putting your art, your work up against an industry. And there was I think it was Ursula Le Guin who did this talk, and she said, it's really important for writers to know the difference between art and capitalism. And I didn't know it. I'm still trying to figure it out now, but I didn't know it. And it sort of took a real emotional toll on me at a certain point, because I just wasn't prepared for what it's like to write and to produce, and then also have to put a work on the market.
It's very time consuming to put a work on the market.
Yeah.
It's very demanding. It's very, and I think Linwood would agree with me here, and probably all of you. There's more and more being asked of writers now, in terms of promotion and technology and so on. So it's quite demanding, I find.
Raymond Chandler never had to go on Facebook. He didn't have to do any of that.
Well, I didn't have social media before I became a writer, like not at all. I'm generally a pretty private person, like not even for my friends or my family. I prefer just to be kind of a ghost and kind of, doing my little projects. And so I really, I don't know if you guys, like there are some writers who can do very well on social media, but I'm not really one of them. And so that I found to be very difficult. And then also understanding the little ins and outs of publishing. It's a very opaque industry. And so I still don't quite understand it, but I'm trying.
So I'm 20.
You don't.
I still can't figure it out. Listen, this is where we're gonna go through everybody. Recommend a book. I'll start with There's a writer named William Landay who about 11 years ago or 12 years ago did a fantastic novel called Defending Jacob. We've had to wait a very long time, but his new book came out a couple of months ago called All That I Have, I Carry With Me. And I don't even know how to describe it. I just thought it was the best book I've read in the last 5 years. Pretty much it was just, there was a moment in Defending Jacob. I had a moment that was so kind of astonishing. It was one of those ones that made me just sort of stop for a second and think about what I'd read, because I had just been kind of hit in the head with a 2x4. And there's a moment like that in All That I Carry, All That I Have, I Carry With Me. So anyway, I would highly recommend it. Daniel, you got a book?
Yeah, just I put in a plug for two fellow Vancouverites who both have books out or coming out now, and that's one a friend of many of us here. Robin Harding's new book, The Drowning Woman, is coming out in June. It's a really great thriller, and you know, everyone should read Robin. So I put a plug in that, and also Dietrich Kaltas, another North Vancouver writer, long-standing Canadian crime writer. His book called The Get, which is set in Toronto in the 60s, and is really very entertaining. Kind of reminded me a bit of Elmore Leonard in style. So I really enjoyed both those.
Sherry? Oh, sorry, Sherry?
A book that really struck me was Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. I loved that book. It was really well written. It's the kind of book that I would call a crime book, but almost literary because it was so well done. It's about a woman who was held captive as a child for many, many years and how it warped her. And it's really interesting, really good book.
Liz is an incredible writer. I
She
really
is.
stuff. Yeah. And just on the Vancouver side, Sam Weeb, who's a friend of mine, has a new book out called Sunset in Jericho. And I think it's the fourth installment of his Wakeland series. These are gritty, hard-boiled crime novels, and definitely check him out, because I think when it comes to Vancouver specific crime fiction, he does a fantastic job. And there was a book that I read last year that it blew me away. It was called Notes on an Execution by Dania Kukavka. Beautiful, just a stunning, beautiful crime novel that really got into the heart of how a crime can just shatter people, and how you pick yourself back up, and just how the ripples kind of go. Just gorgeous writing.
Marissa?
I have so many, but I'm going to try to keep it down to one. So I'm sure everyone has heard of Canadian author Carly Fortune's latest hit, Every Summer After. And I do want to quickly say that what I love about a romance novel like this doing so well internationally is that this book is set in Canada. And this is something that has been a challenge throughout my career. And I've been told by publishers, you know, Americans don't want to read books set in Canada. And I've always suspected that's not really true. I feel like I would love to take you all out for a drink and talk about this with you too, because it's a topic, right? But Carly's books set in Canadian cottage country are doing incredibly well, and deservedly so. And it excites me because it makes me see a different future for where I can set my novels. I also have to give a shout out to this book, Hello Beautiful, which I just finished, by Anne Napolitano. And it was absolutely beautiful, and probably like top 3 favorite books I've ever read. So I just finished it the other day.
Wow.
So, Rick?
Oh, way too many. I'd give you a grocery list that would just go on, and then you'd have to shut me up. But I would, as I'd mentioned at the top, I would recommend True Grit, the book. Forget about the John Wayne movie. True Grit, the book, for voice, because there's much more to the story than what they could ever condense on the screen. And it's just an engaging memoir told in the first person in the voice of the young girl that you see in the movie, but from the perspective of when she's an older woman. And I found that just I don't know how Portis pulled it off. She comes right to life. It's a walk through history, and I think that one really stuck with me. Other books I really enjoyed. I'm going back now to The Diviners by Margaret Lawrence. Some people consider that literary. I just found that an engaging story. I was still in high school, I think, or just got out of high school dating myself, but I almost wanted to look her up and send her a dozen roses when I finished that book, because I thought it was just remarkable. There were moments in that, phrases in that maybe were literary, but to me were compelling storytelling.
What was the name of that again?
The Diviners by Margaret Lawrence.
Well, that's a good,
Yeah. Okay.
that's a good, that's a good show. Margaret Lawrence was a very close friend of ours, and that's an excellent choice. I love that. I'm gonna whip through some of the questions I see down the side here if I can. There's a whole bunch of them, but I'll just throw some out. Anybody can jump in. Do you revise as you go, or get the first draft down and let it percolate for a few months?
A few months.
No time to percolate, I'm afraid.
No.
I do the first draft and then I immediately start editing it.
Yes, and it goes back to when you're on a book a year, kind of a treadmill. It's kind of you don't really have that luxury. You're right. You don't let something sit for several months. Anyone else wants to jump in on that one?
I revise as I go.
Yeah.
I try to blindly draft my first draft as much as I can sometimes, and then go back and I'll do a loose outline, and then I'll go back and figure out the story I'm trying to tell from there. Sometimes I do that, depending, not with the rom-coms. Those are outlined, but yeah. But no, I never let anything sit for a few months. I admire people who can do that. I think Stephen King put that in a book once, right? You need to finish your draft and then leave it in a drawer for 2 months. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe a week? Like, if just my patience, like, it's not even the deadline. Like,
Yeah.
don't-
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, I don't know about you guys, but I don't always write sequentially. So sometimes I have to revise as I go, as I'm skipping ahead and going back and forth. So, yeah.
Someone's asking about what are your favorite book writing events or festivals in Canada?
oh gosh, the Whistler Writing Festival is amazing. And Word on the Street is fun, right?
Sunshine Coast is great.
Mhm.
I think that's the best one I ever did. One of the best I ever did was that's the one in, I don't know how to pronounce this wrong, Sechel? Sunshine Coast, that's
It's Seychelles. Oh, I forget.
it's over there, you know.
Yeah. But it's lovely. It's beautiful.
It's a really great festival. Any others that people think of?
Well, Surrey International Writers Conference was pretty good in BC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then of course there's of course the Toronto International Festival of Authors. They just had their second run at the Motive Festival, which I think is kind of picking up steam, I would hope. I think it was a better festival this year than last. Any others?
I hear the Calgary one's good.
Mhm.
What's that one called? I haven't.
Wordfest, I think.
That's, yeah.
Wordfest. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just got asked about one that's in Lunenburg in September, which I don't think I'm going to be able to make, but I heard it's a really nice one. And this is someone who makes a nice point here. As a reader, I'm not all that pleased to be labeled as reading women's fiction. Women buy and borrow more books than men. Hence, isn't the general category of fiction women's fiction?
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
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 I know
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I don't like women's fiction either.
No, I don't like that one at all. So, but I think I read some statistic, which was something like 80% of readers of fiction are women. So yeah, they kind of own the genre.
Yeah.
And if you don't want it to be called women's fiction, I don't think it should be.
I'd ask Linwood and Rick, like, I think it's higher than that, Marissa. I don't ever hear from male readers, like, ever,
Really?
you know. Well, super occasionally compared to.
I think, I mean, generally speaking, I think that men tend to read more nonfiction than they do fiction. But you know, I mean, I think that's probably true. I think it's probably about 70% of fiction is purchased by women. That certainly would be I think that falls in line with what I've heard.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, but you know, and to their credit, and if that's true, they're certainly not reading, quote, women's fiction because they're buying Lee Child and Daniel Silva.
Yes, so women read books by men, but I suspect not that many men read books by women.
I think
But men
that,
will come up to me at events, and this has happened 10 times now, I think, and say, I read your book. And I'm just like, what is happening right now? Like, are you embarrassed? I want to be like, he read my book, the one with the pink cover.
I think the last 5 books I read have been by women, so I don't buy that fully.
I'm personally not convinced that a lot of men can read. I hear so many dudes just like, oh, you're a writer. You know, I read a book in high school. I read what's the Alchemist when I was like 14 or whatever, but they've never read a thing after that. And I was like, can you still do it?
It might be like sort of like saying Americans didn't want to read books that were set in Canada. Maybe men are not, I think, are being treated unfairly by publishers saying, no, you know what, we're marketing this to women because men are not going to be interested. But if it was marketed slightly differently, I'm sure men would. I think it's just sometimes, especially with books with women on the cover and certain colors, it's just.
I wonder if men used to read Jane Austen.
Hmm.
Because she would be, women's fiction now.
Yeah.
I think these distinctions didn't exist in the old days.
I don't think so.
so we're almost out of, as my friend John Moore says when he's on the radio and it shows us, so we're almost out of runway. So anybody, a final thought from everyone before we have to sign off and say so long.
Read what you enjoy.
Yeah.
And don't be ashamed of it.
And continue to, if you are a fan of what's considered commercial fiction or genre fiction, I think the Canadian literary scene is so dynamic and, can find a way to demand that it be set here. And I think that will just open things up for us too, because we'll have our own literary scene.
In the end, it's all about storytelling. Forget labels. It's a story. You can go through classic literature. You can go through the next book that's going to come out next week or next month. It's all about storytelling. If it engages you, forget the labels.
Yeah,
right.
find a good story. Find a good story. That's it.
Mhm.
Yeah, preferably one of ours in this panel. But, yeah, I totally agree. And I don't think we're dumping on literary fiction. I'm sure we all love literary fiction too. It's just that a story is a story, as everyone is saying.
I do. I used to tell Linwood, I think, and others, that I read thrillers during the day because they get my blood going, and I read classic literature at night. And not to put me to sleep, but there's a reason why some of those books still hold up. I mean, we can have a whole other discussion on that. There's some elements in some of the greats, and now that I've retired, I'm going to read all the biggest, fattest classics that I was supposed to read. And I'm going, this is why they're still around. They're very good.
I love those big fat classics, and I think they have great stories. I just wonder if some of the more contemporary literary books have lost their way and aren't really telling such great stories anymore. That was my point only.
Yeah.
That's it, Shari. Yes. Les Miserables. I love that book.
Great story.
Love that book.
Would that be, that had a real plot. It wasn't meandering to me. So
it was full of stories.
It was a great story.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was the inspiration for the Fugitive TV series.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
great
read it
story.
while I was writing Lucky. It was part of the inspiration for Lucky and her criminal life beyond circumstances beyond her control.
Well, we have, I know we have Emma lurking in the background here who's overseeing things to wrap this up. So I'm going to, before I turn it over to Emma, I'm just going to say finally, thank you to everybody who participated.
Thanks.
Thank you, Emma, and everyone with the Giller Prize to setting us up. And I would just say that when we have a writer's strike and we have a looming actors strike in Hollywood, so no one should panic about there not being more TV and movies made for a while, because there is a solution. You can read a book.
For the price of dinner in this town, you can.
And thanks to all of you. Thank you so much for participating. It was really wonderful listening in as you discussed your craft, and we appreciate you taking the time. And to everyone who is watching, please note that a recording of the conversation will be available tomorrow on our YouTube channel. So please tell your friends if they missed it. Thanks and have a good night. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure.